I'm going to give a talk this evening, which is given the scary title, Changing the World. So this is a bit of an all-encompassing talk, but I shall just talk about some parts of the thing. So we're coming to the end of this last 12 months year's theme for talks, and we've been looking at the refuge tree, and we've travelled all the way around the world almost, and all the way through our minds. So we've travelled both inwardly and outwardly to see where Triratna Buddhism has come from, where its lineage lies, if you like. And we've looked at the refuge tree both in root and branch. And in this final stage, we're looking at the special emphases of Triratna Buddhism. How Sangharakshita, who is the founder of this movement, brought together his scholarship and his lifetime of experience in shaping the Triratna movement. And tonight I'm going to talk about our relationship with the world as practicing Buddhists. Changing the world, a pretty wide-ranging and all-encompassing topic. The main thing here to remember is that we are not separate from the world in any way. We're not separate from the world in any way. The Buddha's fundamental teaching is the truth of conditionality, pratitya samutpada. All things proceed from a cause, say the scriptures, and indeed proceed from many causes simultaneously. Conditionality embeds us and our actions in everything we perceive as out there. Conditionality means that we can never act in isolation. We are irrevocably linked to all beings and the world around us. The Buddha also taught the law of karma, which simply says that all our actions will have consequences, both internally in terms of repercussions for our mental states, and externally on the world around us. We all have ethical responsibility for our actions, and this is the ground that transformation of the self and transformation of the world around us takes place. So I just want to start off by talking about why we should bother. Why do we need to bother about the world around us? In my experience, I think that quite a few people think that to be a Buddhist is about me and my meditation, it's about me and my study, me and my progress, me and my spiritual development. And of course this is true, but only to a certain degree. Because of the truth of conditionality, we do need a world which is conducive to the well-being of our practice. And we do need a practice which is, in terms of ethics, conducive to the well-being of the world. These two things are just not separate. We need to promote good conditions for our practice, and the main way that this can be done is through an ethical relationship with the world around us. We need to take responsibility for our actions and the results of our actions. We need to see ourselves as fully embedded in the world and not separate from it. This can be quite difficult. This is not an easy way of looking at the world. We live in a society which can be the antithesis of the spiritual life, and part of a global society which also causes harm to the world around us and to other people in it. Sometimes we can think that the problems of the world are so big and our actions so insignificant that they just won't make a difference. This way of thinking can be just a mechanism for doing nothing. It can just completely block our actions. New concepts from science, like the butterfly effect, I don't know if you've come across this. It came out of a book which was printed in 1987 by Gleich, a book called Chaos. And in it he uses this graphic example of a butterfly flapping its wings in the southern hemisphere can cause a rainstorm in the northern hemisphere. And he talks about how tiny influences tiny actions can have ripples extending far beyond what we can see, and shows us that conditions for large-scale change can come through the cumulative effect of very small changes. And very small changes that are the way we act in the world can have large repercussions. Small changes can have huge effects. To think of our actions as insignificant is to misunderstand conditionality. It's to misunderstand the teaching of the Buddha, Pratita Samutpada. In 12th century Tibet, we find a man called Gampopa, a guru, writing in his book, The Jewel Ornament of Liberation, which is a fantastic title, about the conditions that humans need in order to practice successfully. He talks about both internal conditions and external conditions necessary for Buddhist practice. One of these external conditions is what he calls not being born into a border country. He recognises very clearly that if we live in a lawless, unstable, uncultured society where people live without education, do not know where the next meal is coming from, and fear a knock on the door in the middle of the night, that we're not going to be able to have an opportunity to hear the Dharma, let alone practice it. And very sadly, many people in the world are in this situation. We need to recognise that we have this freedom and opportunity, and that we need to guard and protect it where it exists and promote it in places where it does not exist. Sangharakshita, our founder, said in his lecture, Blueprint for a New World, broadly speaking, we may say there are two views. The first view says that we must change the system, and the other view is that we must change the individual. If we want to change the world, we must change ourselves. The first view, that we must change the system, is generally regarded as the secular view, not to say the materialist view. And the second, that we must change ourselves, is generally regarded as a spiritual view. Personally, I cannot agree with either view completely. The fact they are not mutually exclusive. Spiritual movements are generally expected to adopt the second view, that is to say, the spiritual view, the view that we must change ourselves, improve ourselves, and then everything will be all right. The world, almost automatically, will be a better and a happier place. But the FWBO, as it was called then, Triratna as it's called now, does not share this view, this so-called spiritual view. In Triratna, we certainly are concerned with the development of the individual, regard this as absolutely crucial, absolutely fundamental, even where the question of transforming the world into a spiritual community is concerned. But at the same time, we do recognise that external conditions can and do help or hinder. If we live under the right system, it is easier to develop, and if we live under the wrong system, it is more difficult. So we can be alert and guard our good conditions, and we need to promote change, restore sanity to an increasingly insane world. Buddhism does not have a party line when it comes to promoting change. The only way to do this is through having a Buddhist perspective and a Buddhist approach to world problems, through awareness and ethical practice. Through ethics, meditation and wisdom comes a clearer understanding of our actions and their consequences. A few years ago, after I entered the order, I went to see Sangharakshita. I wanted to talk to him about the altruistic dimension of practice, a dimension which sees beyond me and mine. And I wanted to talk to him about being active in the world, and a lecture that he gave in 1971, which had really grabbed my attention. I wanted to know if he was still behind what he said, because he does change emphasis. He has changed emphasis over the years. I talked about why it seemed to speak to me, and to my delight, he said that he was still fully behind what he had said 35 years previously. And not only that, he encouraged me to promote the talk and its understanding within the movement. So that's what I'm going to do today. Sangharakshita's lecture of 1971 was called Evolution or Extinction, a Buddhist View of Current World Problems. It's one of his more snappy titles. In this lecture, Bhante talks about, this is how I refer to Sangharakshita, my teacher, talks about the kinds of problems the world faces: economic, political, commercial, social, racial, and I would add, after now what is 40 years, ecological, population pressure, and perhaps the most pressing, climate change. He talks about promoting change, he talks about spiritual development and the spiritual community as essential foundations for change. He says that we can have strong reactions to the cruelties and injustices of our world, but when this initial reaction has exhausted itself, we can feel both exhausted and powerless. The problems of the world can seem too big for us to do anything about, so we try and forget about them and just deal with our smaller, personal lives. He says that the principle of this comes from taking from the world no more than you need. I think I've got the wrong page. Good, that's better. So, I'm just going to reorganise these slightly. And then it won't happen again. Just bear with me. Well, okay. He says, we are sorry that others suffer, but at least we can enjoy our own lives. But he is also unequivocal. However, my view is that such an attitude of withdrawal from public concerns into purely personal ones is one that is not worthy of a human being. It represents an abdication of responsibility. Sangharakshita goes on to say, in my view, at this very critical juncture of human history, every thinking human being can and should do 4 things. So what are these 4 things? Firstly, he should develop himself. Secondly, join a spiritual community. Thirdly, draw his support from all anti-spiritual forces and exert whatever influence for good he can in any group in which he unavoidably does belong. This is my list. So this is what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to first talk about self-development. He says we are to develop ourselves if we wish to change the world. This is the foundation of the spiritual life. For Sangharakshita, this is the raising of the level of consciousness, awareness of ourselves. Without this awareness, we cannot make intelligent choices. Without this awareness, we cannot make ethical choices. We need to know who we are and how we react in different situations. We need to be able to reflect on our actions and their consequences. So how do we do this? We need concentration, integration of our energies. We need to foster and encourage a wider perspective than just me and mine. We do both of these through meditation practice, through the mindfulness of breathing and the metta bhavana. As we develop these qualities, we can see more clearly how to live ethically in the world, to do no harm, and to live in line with the precepts. Sangharakshita also talks about specific actions that can be taken to support meditation practice, looking after your health, simplifying your day-to-day life as much as possible, and making time to study. Taking the opportunity to refine and develop your emotional sensibilities through the arts, he says, self-development always comes first. However active you might be in all sorts of external areas, political, social, educational, or whatever, if you are not making an effort to develop yourself, you are not going to be able to make any truly positive contribution to anything or anyone. He's very unequivocal. This is a typically strong statement, but one that we all probably know that's true. We can probably think of instances where being well-meaning is just not enough. A good example of well-meaning without clarity and true meta can happen when we come face to face with suffering. There's a huge difference between a response that comes from pity or sentimentality rather than kindness or real empathy. Both sentimentality and pity are self-referential, subjective ways of responding. Pity contains a pushing away of another's suffering as we fear that it could be something that could happen to us. Sentimentality rather enjoys the suffering of others as it gives us an opportunity to look caring and court admiration, but without doing much useful. I had an acquaintance some years ago who was very sentimental. She would go and see people who were in difficulty as a priority, always being the first to show up after hearing a piece of bad news. She would gush with emotion, pat you on the back, say there, and go home as if nothing had happened. I learnt not to tell her anything. It was just too painful to have to deal with her as well as whatever else was going on. Sometimes I think this kind of sentimental response can be harnessed by charities, asking you to give with pictures of doe-eyed children looking winsomely into the camera. I can get a bit awkward or perhaps a bit naughty and about this sort of thing. And sometimes I think I just really want to give my money to help the difficult, ugly and smelly in the world. They don't quite get the same press. For our Indian brothers and sisters in Triratna, self-development and taking responsibility for your actions is truly radical and seriously culturally subversive. We have a large part of our movement in India and a great many and hundreds of order members there too. I was ordained in India alongside my Indian sisters in the order, and it was very inspiring and also very eye-opening. In India, to step outside Hinduism, to step outside the caste system, is to invite ostracism and sometimes violence. Hinduism insists that you'll be content with whatever caste or non-caste that you have been born into. It is your fate, and you must live within it, whatever it is like. It teaches you there is nothing you can do about it, and you cannot rise above the caste you were born into. To become a Buddhist, to meditate, study the Dharma, and personally develop is an anathema. For women to become Buddhists, and particularly to join the order, is not only to go against caste identity, but also very strongly against gender role in India. The Indian women who entered the order on my retreat were all heroines. They really were. We had an Indian preceptor, a woman who brought other women into the order on my retreat, and she was an elderly woman, and when she was in her middle age, she decided that she wanted to go on retreat. She'd come across the Dharma and she wanted to go on retreat. Now, to go on retreat, she would have to ask her husband's permission, and it was his permission. Without his permission, she couldn't go. And he wasn't very happy about her going, so she went anyway. And stepping outside her door and going on retreat, she knew that she was risking being put out on the street by her husband. And to be put out on the street as an Indian woman is almost like ending your life. It's like committing suicide. You're nobody. Nobody will care for you. Nobody will assist you in any way whatsoever. So she did it. Her desire to self-develop and to become more, to live along the lines of the Dharma was so strong that she was willing to risk that. She now travels all over the world, and I was talking to her and I said, "What does your husband feel now about you travelling all over the world?" She said, "He understands that I am his gift to the world." So in some ways, she still belongs to her husband, that he still gives her permission to do these things, but she's introduced a different perspective, that he gives her away. He gives her away to the Dharma. He gives her away to the good of the world, and that's how she does it. I had a woman on my retreat who was, a lot of the women in the order are Dalits, ex-untouchables. But we have got quite a few other people who come from other castes, including people from Brahmin castes. And a woman who I was on retreat with was of a warrior class, so it's a very higher caste in the Hindu system. And she was beaten up by her brother and by her brother's friends. And the reason that happened was because she was merely associating with people in a different caste, in lower castes. You know, she was just going out to meetings. So, you know, for them to actually take this stand and to say, yes, I want to become better, I want to become more than I am, I wish to practice the Dharma, is stepping outside the norms within their society in a way that we really cannot understand. We cannot understand. The Indian wing of Triratna is large, it's important, and it is fundamentally challenging the iniquities of the caste system. Compared with our Indian brothers and sisters, got all my numbers muddled up. Hang on, that's it. Compared with our Indian brothers and sisters, we are unbelievably wealthy. We are unbelievably wealthy. So if you are able to give financial support to Karuna, social projects, or the Indian Dharma Trust, which helps support people within the order and outside of it to spread the Dharma in India, please do so. It's really important that we support these people. We are supporting a revolution, a Dharma revolution in India, a revolution based on self-development and rejection of the caste system. Self-development can be radical in our society too. To be able to stand our ground, to speak our mind, however kindly, can be a challenge to the habit and conformity within our society, and is not always received terribly well. It can also lead to amusement and confusion. So my partner and I, earlier on this year, we went to a very nice caravan in the middle of nowhere in Scotland, where it rained and snowed and was freezing cold. But anyway, we had a very nice time, and but one of the things that we had a problem with was the fact that on the radio we could only get Scottish dancing or football. There didn't seem to be anything else. And then we noticed that there was a digibox in the caravan, and you can get the radio on the digibox. So we thought, oh well, you know, we can get Radio 4, and we couldn't use the digibox. We just didn't know how to use it. So we went to see the bloke whose caravan it was. So we arrived on the Saturday. We were now on Thursday, wanting to know how the digibox worked, and he just could not believe we hadn't watched television. He just couldn't believe that we were we kept on going, well, what are you doing? He said, oh, we're very self-sufficient. You know, we've been having a very nice time, and we do a lot of reading. And actually, we were doing qigong and meditation and reading, doing a bit of drawing, popping out when the weather got better and things like this. And then at the end of the retreat, at the end of their week, we said to him, have you got anyone coming? Have you got anyone coming? And he said no. And I said, well, can we stay for another 2 or 3 days? And he said, the weather's not going to get any better. And we went, no, but we're having such a nice time. We just like to stay a bit longer. And he just could not understand. I know we kept on telling him what we were doing, and he couldn't understand that it would be enough. He just really could not understand that it would be enough. We had a lovely holiday. Anyway, so he didn't understand. He didn't understand. So in this lecture, the next thing that Sangharakshita suggests is that you join a spiritual community. He says this does not necessarily mean joining some kind of organised body or a residential community. And there can be all sorts of different kinds of spiritual communities. And I sometimes see myself as belonging to different layers of spiritual community. So one of the spiritual communities I belong to is the Order, which in itself is fascinating. It's a fascinating non-organisation. So it has no legal entity, it has no economic entity, It has no written rules or standing orders. It's held together basically by two things: commitment to spiritual ideals and friendship. That's it. That's what the order hangs together with, and it manages to hang together internationally to do that. I think it's fantastic. So I belong to the order. I belong to this lovely Sangha in Sheffield. I belong to a working team, the Order Office team. I belong to the network of engaged Buddhists, and I belong to my lovely chapter. And all these come together in different ways, providing me with regular support, regular contact, and challenge from people who are trying to live a spiritual life as I am. And these are the vital context for my practice. One of the most important aspects of the spiritual community for me is that it's in an ideal position to critique the society that we live in. It's an ideal position to challenge assumptions and habitual ways of living. A spiritual community can be an exemplar for another way of living. I truly believe this is of vital importance and will be increasingly so. The world we live in at present is fundamentally unsustainable. The way we live in it is fundamentally unsustainable. It cannot continue with the assumptions of increased wealth and higher standards of living for all. The planet just cannot support this. The simple mathematics of population. I heard this week that in 30 years' time there are going to be 9 billion people on this planet. I mean, you just need to take a few moments to understand what that means. 9 billion people. And the natural resources on this planet are just decreasing. We've just got less and less of everything. How can we support 9 billion people in the way that we expect to, that everybody would like to? Yet our society seems to largely ignore this. It's just too scary to think about not having things. Especially as advertising tells us, there are just loads of things that we must have just to be happy. In the Karaniya Metta Sutta, there's this lovely word, and it's called, it's the word subaro. I said it right, Daniel? It's a word to describe the quality of the spiritually adept. It means easy to support. In a discussion of this term, Sangharakshita says, the fact that we have financial resources to help ourselves to what we fancy does not justify our consuming the wealth of the world without consideration for the claims of others, both in the present and in the future, to those same resources. He says that the principle of this term, being easy to support, comes down from taking from the world no more than you need and freely contributing what you have. We are, of course, talking about simplicity, contentment, and generosity. We're talking about being aware of the results of our lifestyle on other people and the world around us, and acting on our understanding that all our actions will have consequences. The spiritual community has something to offer the world, something the world needs in this respect. We can offer an alternative to consumerism, the idea that profit and productivity are more important than anything else. We can promote a new way of living, valuing simplicity, not as a deprivation, but as a practice that can be spiritually enriching. We offer a sustainable way of life as a positive choice, a delightful way to live, sensitive to others and the environment. And we can do this with open communication, with kindness and care for each other as its core values. And we can do it with joy and delight. We can exemplify another richer way of life in a confused world with destructive values. To do this, the spiritual community needs to be visible, needs to be open about who we are and what we value. We may need courage to do this, and in a spiritual community, that's going to be easier. Sangharakshita says, spiritual communities have had a crucial impact in the past, and they may, with sufficient vitality, do so again. And this exemplification in itself may have far-reaching results, which we'll never know. I think this is very important to understand, although it's a bit of a tangent. I think it's very important to understand that we may never know the consequences of our actions, and we must not expect to know them. Conditionality is so complex that the results of our actions taken today could be decades from now, or take place over the other side of the world. We just need to act as skillfully as we can, with as much kindness, generosity and clarity as we can manage, and just let it go. Stop wanting outcome or end results. Skillful actions will have beneficial results. The Buddha taught this. We can trust him. So, back on track. The third action Sangharakshita suggests in influencing the world is to withdraw support from all anti-spiritual forces. This is having as little as possible to do with groups, organisations and people who promote greed, hatred and delusion. And this may come to you all of a sudden. You may notice that an activity you thought of as fine and helpful is not fine and helpful at all. I have told my story about the Labour Party before, but I'm going to tell it again because it's a good example. So Mrs. Thatcher drove me into the arms of the Labour Party. I couldn't help it. And I built up a new branch of the Labour Party with a friend of mine. And I was its chair for several years, and I was well behind what was going on. And Mrs. Thatcher was no longer in power. And I was in a meeting in a room over a pub in Acrevere, which is just outside Wrexham. And we were mandating people to go to a national conference. And it's one of those usual fascinating discussions with subsections and clauses and standing orders and things like that. And then all of a sudden it just got very personal. And people were being really horrible to each other in this room. And they were calling on memories of things that people had done in the past and differences between families and all sorts of things. And I just was sitting in this room and I thought, I'm out of here. This is not the way I want to proceed. I've been meditating. I didn't think of myself as a Buddhist at the time. I'd been meditating for some years, and I could just see very clearly that I did not want to be promoting an organisation that could get down to being so dirty and unpleasant to each other. And although I probably think that I could work in that sort of situation now and stand my ground, I couldn't then. I just had to get out. And I wasn't very popular. I resigned from both the chair, my branch of the Labour Party, and the Labour Party itself. I just didn't want to have anything to do with it. And although my name was Mud for a bit, most people came round in the end. The corollary of this is that we can join with other communities to promote spiritual values. Peace groups, anti-globalisation networks, Friends of the Earth, they're all good outfits in promoting the health and well-being of the world and its inhabitants. But take your Buddhist values and principles with you. Don't leave them at home. I'm a member of Amnesty, and I have been for many years, and see no reason to stop. I still find it difficult to believe that people can treat each other with such unbelievable cruelty, although I'm reading a very good book by Steven Pinker at the moment that's helping me to understand this. Joining with others in this way, I do not have to be silent or condone such behaviour. I can support those who are often more knowledgeable, courageous, and in a position to influence change. I can also take part as one small link in a worldwide movement promoting basic freedoms we take for granted and the care of others. It's worth doing. For me, it's really worth doing. Lastly, Sangharakshita advises us to exert an influence for good in any group we unavoidably belong to. And there are loads of these. So they start with our family. We unavoidably belong to our family, whatever they're like. We unavoidably go out to work, most of us, and we work with the people who are around us, whatever they're like. We belong to walking groups, we do charity work, we join choirs. Whatever you're involved in, be who you are. Sangharakshita says, "It is always possible to act in accordance with one's ideals. There is no need to surrender your individuality. Encourage people to think for themselves and develop their own minds." I had a very interesting conversation a week or so ago we had a big European order gathering just outside Norwich. There were 400 of us there. It was fantastic. And she's a woman who's been a social worker for many years. She's very experienced, and she's now working at a managerial level. And she's just had enough. She's just had enough. So she's put in her notice, and she became free last Friday. So I've been thinking about her. So, and her manager said something very interesting to her. She said, you know, she did the usual things, a valued member of the team and all this sort of business, and works hard and things like that. And then she said, "I really don't know what it's going to be without you." She said, "You keep me honest." And it was just because she was who she is in her working situation. It was a tribute to the influence she had within that group, how her ethics stood out and changed the way the people around her acted. Sangharakshita concludes his talk by saying, "It doesn't matter how humble a level we are operating at, or how undramatic our work may be. If enough earthworms burrow away under the foundations of even the most stable building, the soil begins to loosen, it starts to crumble away. The foundations subside, and the whole building is liable to crack and collapse. Likewise, however powerful the existing order may seem, it is not invulnerable to the underwhelming influence of enough individuals working, whether directly or indirectly, in cooperation." It is important for us as practitioners to step outside mainstream society and at the same time be intimately connected with it. Connected but not absorbed. We need to retain the Buddhist view of world problems, have a critique which is based on awareness and ethics, but have enough involvement with society to promote questioning, action and change, both in yourself, in your contact with others and in the world around you. Take up your place, stand on your own ground as a true individual, and really take on the fact that all our actions have consequences. I work for the Triratna Order. I'm part of a kind of small secretariat. I have no formal title, but I see myself as a sort of helper to the international order conveners, and I do all sorts of different things. My personal motivation for doing this work is that I would like to see the order be alive and kicking in 200 years' time. The world needs the order, its ethics, and promotion of kindness and clear thinking. The world needs spiritual development, even enlightened beings. The world needs the Dharma, it just doesn't know it. We need a very long-term view for the Dharma to survive and thrive, and we need the right conditions for this to happen. As I said at the beginning of this talk, because of the truth of conditionality, we do need a world conducive to the well-being of our practice, and we do need a practice which is, in terms of ethics, conducive to the well-being of the world. They're not separate. We need to promote good conditions for practice, and the main way that we can be done is through an ethical relationship with the world around us. We need to take responsibility for our actions and the results of those actions. It seems to be more and more that promotion of change in its most radical sense can only come from the promotion of awareness and the promotion of ethics. For me, this is of vital importance. It also undercuts the values of our westernised society, as it has the power to undermine greed, hatred and delusion, the root causes of suffering and destruction. And we may not be popular in this task. Sangharakshita again. It's easy to forget that the Buddhist message is a subversive one, that its values run counter to mundane or worldly norms, that your commitment to its ethical principles may lead you on occasion to offend conventional notions of morality. So we might as well act with as much integrity and act decisively and with as much kindness, generosity and clarity as we can manage, and then just let go of our to come. Don't worry about what happens. Act according to our ideals and our principles. Be prepared to be subversive, trust the process, take risks, do it and do it with others.